the fact that it's found in the water, downriver. So we're organizing a search for Jackie and Lily Sullivan. We are relying on community members to come and join those efforts. We're going to offer like a little bit of shooting from the hip training on walking along looking for evidence. We've had about 40 people volunteer, but overnight you've had some people drop out. So I would be over the moon if 30 people showed up. Your safety does come first. We are looking for the kids, but your safety comes first. I would say mostly family and friends, and then there's just like concerned members of the community that wanted to get involved and help search, and this is our opportunity to get that. We were not going to get involved. We were trying to stay far away from this because we felt that the RCMP were heavily involved, search and rescue was heavily involved. They were doing a bang-up job from what we could see from the outside looking in, and as soon as you start having conversations with the family, when any family member fills out an intake with Please Bring Me Home, we always get involved in some capacity. We never say no. Of course, it's sad we're going to search for 2 missing kids, but I think that the community and the family coming together to do this effort and a crew coming from Ontario is hopefully overpowering that somberness.
Okay, my team, we're going.
Stay safe.
You guys good?
Can you describe how the day has been going so far?
It's been a wee bit stressful. Talked to property owners who are upset that we're there.
I will have you charged for trespassing on private property.
Do it!
This has been by far one of the more difficult ones to manage from a safety perspective. Now that I've been here, I'm even in my own mind trying to comprehend how it can be possible that these kids wandered off and they haven't been found. Especially after being in there and seeing all the flagging tape and hearing from all the property owners that we spoke with what the searching has been done. I'm having a really hard time fathoming that probability now that I've seen it for myself.
And what makes you say that?
Many things, but I think most importantly it is the amount of effort that search and rescue has put forward to try and find these kids and how quick they were able to start that process. I just find it more unlikely by the minute today that they had wandered. I'm not saying it's not possible. It's just I after seeing it, I can't understand how they wouldn't have been found that first day. We're not stopping. We have to stop because winter's approaching, and we will come back in springtime and do a search, dependent on what our CMP's involvement in springtime will be. So, and who knows what will be learned throughout the winter. When the families ask for help, you can't really say no, whether it's a current case or whatever. We have the capacity to do it. We shot from the hip here and planned this in 2 weeks, and we were able to do it, and we were able to clear many kilometers just by asking for locals to come help. So it can certainly be done, and we're in it until they're found.
When a witness gives a degree of certainty rather than a categorical claim, investigators must balance it carefully. A 60 to 80% confidence interval signals meaningful recollection, but also leaves room for error. Detectives typically want corroboration, other witnesses who saw the same person, physical evidence that places the person at the scene, or forensic matches. In the absence of those, even a heartfelt partial identification cannot be treated as conclusive. The Smith-Slater statements therefore intensified scrutiny of Jerry McCann's movements that night while simultaneously underscoring how memory and later exposure to media images can change a witness's confidence. That tension between the power of human recognition and its fragility is at the heart of why the Smith identification remained controversial and consequential. Wikipedia. Forensic EFITs, produced early, but withheld from public release until 2013. Following the Smith sighting, police produced EFITs, electronic facial composites, based on the witnesses' descriptions. Those EFITs were an investigative tool intended to help the public and the police identify the man. However, the public did not see them until Scotland Yard released them in October 2013 for a Crime Watch reconstruction, years after the initial disappearance. Reporting later suggested the EFITs existed in police files much earlier, which raised questions about the pace and transparency of evidence release. For families and community members following such a case, Delays or perceived withholding of visual evidence breeds suspicion and allegations of mismanagement or worse. From a policing standpoint, there are various reasons evidence may be withheld early in a case: preserving investigative advantage, avoiding alerting suspects, or waiting until enough corroborating material exists to justify public dissemination. But withholding also carries costs. It can slow crowdsourced recognition, permit rumors to proliferate, and create a credibility gap between police and the public. In the McCann story, the long interval between EFIT production and public release became a focal point for critics who argued that early, broader exposure to the EFITs might have generated leads sooner. The controversy over timing contributed to the sense, held by some, that opportunities were missed or that there was an avoidable gap between the investigation's actions and the public's right to see potentially crucial information. Wikipedia. Cadaver dogs and forensic alerts. What the dogs detected and why it didn't close the case. Specialist sniffer dogs were brought into the investigation and reportedly alerted both in the McCann's holiday apartment, Apartment 5A, and to areas of the family's rental car. One dog trained to detect human blood and another trained as an enhanced victim recovery dog gave indications that investigators found worrying enough to collect swabs and other samples. In popular retellings, the image of dogs alerting to a possible cadaver scent is dramatic and emotionally powerful. It suggests a tragic finality many feared. But canine alerts are indicators, not standalone proof. They must be corroborated by laboratory DNA and serological testing to establish a chain of evidence that can be accepted in court. In this case, the subsequent lab work failed to produce a definitive match linking those alerts to Madeline. Samples were often degraded, mixed, or too small for conclusive profiling. That scientific ambiguity meant the evocative power of the dog's reactions could not be converted into a legal or forensic endpoint. For some, the dog's alerts remain the strongest single scientific suggestion that something terrible may have happened in or around the apartment. For others, the lack of corroborating lab evidence highlights the risk of overinterpreting dog behavior. Either way, the presence of canine alerts ensured that the investigation could not be neatly closed on the basis of eyewitness accounts alone, and that the absence of clear lab confirmation left the field open to multiple competing explanations. Wikipedia +1. Christian Bruckner, often referenced as the German suspect investigations, but no conclusive match to Smith EFITs. Years into the inquiry, attention turned to a German man, Christian Bruckner, sometimes referenced in the press under legal privacy protections as Christian B., who lived in the Algarve at various times and whose criminal history drew investigators' scrutiny. German prosecutors later said they had concrete evidence that linked Bruckner to Madeline's disappearance, and he was identified as a prime suspect in 2020. Yet matching historical eyewitness EFITs, such as those produced from the Smith sighting, to any single suspect in a way that satisfies court standards remains difficult unless there is corroborating forensic or documentary evidence. Bruckner's alleged presence in the region and his criminal record made him an obvious person of interest, but investigators must be careful to separate circumstantial convergence from proof. EFITs can help focus inquiries but cannot, by themselves, secure a conviction. As recent public statements by German and British authorities make clear, the path from suspicion to charge depends on a broad body of corroborative material, phone records, travel logs, DNA, or other physical evidence that either establishes presence or links a suspect to the crime. In the McCann case, Bruckner's investigation intensified the search for such corroboration, but as of the latest public updates, prosecutors have stressed caution about charging without sufficient, admissible evidence. Reuters +1. Delays, suppression allegations, and damaged credibility. Why transparency matters. The long delays in releasing EFITs, disputes over what information was shared when, and headline-grabbing media stories alleging withheld evidence fed public suspicions of cover-up and incompetence. Whether those suspicions were fair or misplaced, the effect was public erosion of confidence in both the investigation and in the official narratives that emerged. Official secrecy can be legitimate when it protects a live inquiry, but too much opacity breeds conspiracy theories. Likewise, premature disclosure can spoil lines of inquiry. The McCann case exposed how hard it is to find the right balance. Accusations that evidence was suppressed, for tactical reasons or through error, proved politically and emotionally potent. They encouraged alternative narratives to flourish online and in tabloids, with many people believing that the whole truth was being concealed. Those allegations, whether ultimately proven or not, had practical consequences. They diverted attention, encouraged hostile public debate, and made cooperative witnesses more wary. In missing person cases, where public help is often crucial, credibility problems can directly reduce the quantity and quality of useful leads. That is why many experts insist that timely, clear communication, coupled with careful explanation of why some information must remain confidential, is essential to sustain both investigative integrity and public trust. A man was seen walking away from the resort clutching a small, barefoot blonde child. That witness account, given by the Smith family on the night Madeleine McCann vanished, changed everything. If the timing is right, it contradicts key elements of the official sequence of events and forces us to ask, did investigators miss a window of opportunity, or did the evidence get tangled by confusion and delay? Before anything else, hit subscribe and turn on your bells to get first-hand updates on this story and others as we follow developments and re-examine the evidence. Smith family sighting, May 3, 2007, a headline witness that shifted the timeline. On the evening of May 3, 2007, Martin and Mary Smith, holidaymakers staying in Praia da Luz, reported seeing a man carrying a small blonde child close to the Ocean Club. Their description placed the encounter on a street a short distance from the McCann's apartment. The child was said to be barefoot and wearing light-colored pajamas, around the same age and description as Madeleine. For investigators and later analysts, that single sighting became one of the clearest independent pieces of eyewitness evidence because it offered a concrete time and a physical description at a moment when the details were otherwise confused and incomplete. The strength of the Smith sighting is partly practical. Unlike recollections formed after media exposure, the Smiths reported that they had not been following the news at the time and that their observation was a spontaneous, ordinary moment on holiday. That matters because eyewitness accounts created before a public narrative takes hold can carry more weight. People don't have the benefit, or the contamination, of later broadcast images or suggested timelines. Still, eyewitness testimony is never perfect. Memory is subject to stress, lighting, perspective, and the limits of how fast people can judge distance, age, and clothing in passing. Investigators recognize these limits, but in this case the Smiths' account was taken seriously because it aligned closely with the physical description of Madeleine and because it placed a child in the vicinity of the resort, walking away from the Ocean Club toward the beach. This sighting therefore became a pivot, a point investigators used to widen the search area and to reconsider earlier leads. Wikipedia. Tanner sighting, 9:15 p.m. Later discredited as unrelated tourist. Early in the inquiry, another witness, Jane Tanner, a friend of the McCanns, reported seeing a man carrying a child at roughly 9:15 p.m., a sighting that initially seemed to provide a crucial earlier timestamp for what happened. For a while, the Tanner sighting dominated public attention because it suggested an abduction far earlier than some versions of events allowed. However, police later concluded that the person Tanner reported seeing was a tourist who was not connected to Madeleine's disappearance. Investigators following up on Tanner's description were ultimately satisfied it was a mistaken identification and that it should not anchor the timeline as others had presumed. The consequence was twofold. First, it freed investigators to treat the night's timeline as more open-ended rather than fixed to Tanner's window, and second, it elevated the Smith sighting in importance because the Smiths' reported time occurred later than Tanner's and therefore narrowed the crucial window in a different direction. That reevaluation of Tanner's sighting was a key turning point in the early days, and it helped refocus efforts onto other eyewitness evidence that seemed less likely to be an innocent misperception. South China Morning Post. Smith sighting timing is almost equal to 9:55, 10:00 p.m., narrowing the disappearance window. The Smiths estimated they saw the man with the child at about 9:55 to 10 p.m., significantly later than Tanner's earlier sighting and closer to the moment the McCanns first noticed Madeleine missing. If accurate, that timing tightens the window during which an abduction could plausibly have happened. Narrow windows are valuable in investigations because they reduce the number of potential suspects, allow police to check alibis more effectively, and concentrate searches where they can matter most. For instance, CCTV checks, phone records, and traffic movement can be cross-referenced more fruitfully when a time frame is well-defined. Yet there are problems with treating a single estimate as definitive. Nighttime clocks, holiday time perceptions, and the normal imprecision of human recall mean that a margin of error must be expected. Still, when independent witnesses place a similar event in a similar location, the convergence increases the likelihood that something significant occurred. In the McCann case, the later Smith timing suggested that whatever happened to Madeline, if she had been taken by someone in public, could have occurred later than some early narratives proposed. That in turn forced investigators to revisit the McCann's movements and the possible paths a suspect might have taken away from the resort. The narrowing effect also shifted how the public reconstructed the evening. Small shifts in minutes and distances became the difference between a stranger snatching a child in the dark and other, more complicated scenarios. That is why the Smith timing was treated as a central recalibration of the timeline. Wikipedia. Description of the man: 30 to 40, beige trousers, dark top, awkward carry. Why details mattered. Multiple witnesses and follow-up interviews produced a composite image: a man aged roughly 30 to 40, wearing beige or cream trousers paired with a darker top, carrying a young child in an awkward or hurried manner. The child's being barefoot and in light pajamas made the sighting especially jarring. It suggested the child was not being carried by a parent on a casual walk, but instead being moved abruptly. Physical details such as the style of trousers, the Smiths noted buckles or buttons on the side, became fixations for investigators and armchair detectives alike because they can be concrete anchors in an otherwise fluid sea of memory. For detectives, precise clothing descriptions can be pivotal if corroborated by CCTV or subsequent sightings. They can link an eyewitness account to a suspect's known wardrobe or to items sold in a particular shop. But clothes wearers change them. Lighting affects color perception, and long distance, nighttime viewing can make it hard even for motivated witnesses to be accurate without corroboration. The awkward carrying detail, though, adds dimension to the sighting. It implies haste, discomfort, and an absence of parental tenderness, factors that feed into the two central hypotheses about what happened that night. Whether those clothing specifics ultimately point at a particular person or at least narrow a search depends on whether and how other evidence match them. In this investigation, clothing details gave detectives a tangible thread to follow and the public a narrow set of visual cues to latch onto. That sense of concreteness made the Smith sighting feel more compelling than some other leads, even while it remained, like all eyewitness evidence, imperfect. Wikipedia. Martin Smith's later statement: 60 to 80% certainty it resembled Jerry McCann. What that means. Years after the sighting, Martin Smith said he was between 60 and 80% certain that the man he saw resembled Jerry McCann when he saw later footage of Jerry's posture and the way he carried his younger child.